Today's chapter talk discusses presentation aids, two simple learning objectives from our reading this week. Identify the function of presentation aids and evaluate how to use presentation aids well and ethically. Okay, so let's first define a presentation aid. That is anything visual, auditory, or tactile in terms of supplements intended to enhance the clarity and effectiveness of a presentation. So anything we use beyond the words that you can see, hear, taste, smell, touch, that is a visual aid. There are various types of visual aids that our text will discuss this week. None of these will be absolutely profound to you because at this stage in your learning, you have learned a lot. You've been in front of a lot of different presenters and teachers and professors. But what you will see discussed in the chapter are, of course, PowerPoint. We're going to talk about some best practices, objects that you bring in to actually show for something, people that can become visual aids if you pull up an audience member to help demonstrate something, pictures, photographs are excellent, simple, subtle visual aids, maps, and then of course we have charts and graphs and diagrams. Okay, so let's do it. How we take in information. Our brains are wired with this beautifully complex concept called bandwidth. So we take in information visually, what we see. We take in information via the auditory channel, what we hear, tactile, what we can feel, gustatory, what we can taste, and olfactory, what we can smell. So knowing this, we want to make sure that every visual aid we put in front of our audience is supplementing something. It's adding a visual, it's adding a touch, it's adding a taste to the message. Because the goal is an effective message is going to have all channels firing and accepting the same message. The other cautionary tale is to just please use a variety. If we use one photograph after the next or one quote in written form after the next, the audience becomes somewhat fatigued with that type of visual. So we want to limit our visuals, but we also want some variety. So let's be a little bit more specific. Presentation need to knows. Simplicity, my friends. A simple template. Now, if you are using PowerPoint like I am today, be very aware of your contrast and your clarity. You'll see on the left lots of contrast. And while I personally like these colors, this makes my eyes dance and it's hard to focus. This is an example of too much contrast. Where on the right, we have very simple. We have two colors and we have a clear image. So contrast and clarity speak to simplicity. Next, let's talk about word choice or language. Less is more. Okay, I will not take you through the pain of reading this, but if I had $1 for every presentation I sat through where the slides look similar to this, I would have more dollars than I care to mention. So what is wrong with this picture? Right now, I'm sure there's 15 things popping out at you that are either driving you nuts or are laughable. This is not what we want our visuals to look like. This is a mind jumble, it is confusing, and it is distracting. So let's flip this on its head. Okay, rules about bullet points. The text you put in front of your listener. 6 words maximum. So if I put a sentence next to a bullet, it needs to be 6 words or less. Just as I wrote 6 words maximum, I chose that in saying users prefer to read sentences with 6 or less words, right? Again, that is the role of the speaker. You are going to talk them through the content. This is just a visual summary, a snapshot. And for your listeners who like to take notes, it's an easy way to capture the information. Second rule about bullet points. 6 or less bullet points. Now you'll see I have 4 here. I could stretch that to 6 safely, but 6 is really maximum where you want to go. For one reason, the more content you put on a slide, the smaller the font becomes. And that makes it more difficult to see from a distance, as well as confusing where the slide becomes cluttered. Large, simple font. Our last slide, font disaster. I have encountered several teachers of my children who use a cursive font. And if I open up that email on my phone, I'll tell you, it takes some deep breaths. It's hard for me to get through an email, let alone learn from it or gain the information I need to. So visually, large, simple font. And then let's avoid symbols. Smiley faces, explanation points, overuse of anything like that is simply a distraction. If we go back here, we have some very kind, happy smiley faces and lots of expression. You will do that with your vocals, okay? Your visual does not need to create an expression because that is your role as a speaker. So rules about bullet points, use the rule of 6. 6 words max, 6 or less bullets, large and simple font, and no symbols. Now let's talk about enhancing your message. As a speaker, your visuals should help you, not hurt you, okay? So the visual on the left is Maslow's pyramid of higher needs. You will see that there's some simple color contrast and there's 1 or 2 words within each level of the pyramid. This I would categorize as an enhancement because if I were teaching you about Maslow's pyramid of needs, you could see this in a snapshot, but you could still be focused and engaged with me as a speaker. If we look to the right, I would categorize this as a distraction of a visual. You'll see it's very similar in content, but then we have a lengthy 1 to 2 sentence explanation of each of the terms within each level of the pyramid. So what that does is it takes away from the actual term, right? Because it shrinks the font. And obviously this is for example's sake, but it isn't even clear what those smaller words are. So again, remember visuals are meant to enhance, not distract. Simplicity is key, simple, clear images, and contrast. So let's talk just a bit about color. There are 3 types of color schemes that are commonly used for presentation aids. The first is analogous, second complementary, and third is monochromatic. Now you'll see a visual example of each. Let's tackle analogous first. An analogous color scheme is colors adjacent to each other on the color wheel, okay? So it's used to suggest differences, but also relationship among the components. So for example, if I was speaking to faculty and staff at a college, I might have color-coded students, faculty, administration. So each member in the audience, they belong together, but information is specific or relevant to them by color. That would be an analogous color scheme. Second then is complementary. A complementary color scheme, okay, it complements the message. Complementary color schemes show colors opposite of one another on the color wheel. So red, yellow, blue, these bright primary colors, they suggest tension or opposition. So complementary colors are often used to show problems and solutions or cause and effect. And then lastly, we have the monochromatic. Monochromatic color schemes use a variation of the same color, okay? And this is to convey the idea of variety. It also works well with a timeline. It works well with progression if a topic progresses. So color schemes, this is obviously a more advanced level skill, but think about it in terms to the information you are presenting and try to select your color accordingly. Okay, so let's get a little bit more specific on how-tos. How do we integrate visual aids successfully? Well, my A number 1, folks, no surprise, is to practice. Practice with your visuals. Oftentimes we practice our speech when we're driving in the car or we're getting ready in the morning. And that is great, but it's important we also isolate time to practice utilizing that visual. If it's a PowerPoint, clicking through it as you speak. If it's a flip chart of photos in a classroom, flipping those photos as you move through the information. Practice is the best way to troubleshoot. The second item of integration, display the specific visual as needed, okay? So for example, I was just sharing with you color schemes. Once I was done with that content matter, I advanced the slide. So if you're using technology, advance the slide. And if you don't have a visual for the next topic you're discussing, simply insert a blank slide. It's better to have a blank visual than potentially create the confusion of your prior content hanging over. So if I was still showing that color scheme, going back to it, if I still had this color scheme slide up and I begin talking about something else, it might have you wondering, wait, have we moved on? Are we in the same place? How am I supposed to go from one to the next? Okay, so make sure you're displaying only what is needed. Physically, stay on the side of your visual. Now you'll see this gentleman here in a meeting. He is interacting with his visual. You'll notice he's standing to the side of it, where all viewers can see the visual, but they can also see the presenter. And if you are using a whiteboard or a PowerPoint presentation in the classroom, I recommend moving around. Do not be standing in front of your visual aid. I'm a mover. I interact with the audience, but that also allows them to both watch you and see the visual and how they complement each other. And then lastly, limit the number of visuals. I mentioned that earlier in the presentation, but please remember less is more. If we are hammering graphs and charts of data at our listener, bullet after bullet after bullet, we fatigue our listener and the comprehension becomes more tricky, whereas the visual aid is meant to ease that comprehension. Limit the number of visual aids and be sure to use variety. Okay, final notes under best practices. Practice in the room where you present, and that means use the technology in the room you present. Now, as a college instructor, I move from room to room. And this is definitely, when I take on a new class in a new room, I be sure to get in that classroom, understand how to use the technology to navigate it and troubleshoot. Prepare to improvise. As you know, as wonderful as technology is, it is wonderfully frustrating as well. So hopefully because you've practiced in the room where you present, you will be prepared to improvise, or you'll at least have a better understanding of how to overcome. And remember, most audiences are gracious. We all live in a technological world and we understand what can go wrong. So when you have to improvise, just be honest, be open, laugh with that audience because they will respond to the hiccup like you do. And then lastly, avoid overuse of visuals. Clean, simple, contrast, effective visuals. Okay, so 2 learning objectives today. Identify the functions of presentation aids and evaluate how to use presentation aids well and ethically. Thank you.